Okay, good afternoon. Welcome everyone to the latest ethics webinar. Today we'll be talking about electric vehicle ownership, and I think we're going to try and sort of tackle some of the myths that are out there around EV ownership. My name is Josh Brewer. I'm the Business Development Manager here at Ethics, and I'm being joined today by a really high-powered panel. So I've got Joel Teague, who is the CEO and founder of Co-Charger. I've got James John Louis, CCO of Zoom EV, and I've got Alex Earle, Commercial Director of ZapMap. And I potentially am being joined by Phil Shadbolt, CEO of Easy Charge, but he's not here yet. But I think maybe what I might just do to start off is I might just jump around the panel and just give yourselves a little intro, just like one or two sentences on what you do. So Joel, can I start with you, please?
Okay, yeah, I'm Joel Teague. I'm CEO of Co-Charger. Co-Charger, for those who don't know, is the only dedicated platform for community charge point sharing. Shall I keep going on what that means, or should we leave that for later?
I think we can pick that up later. Yeah, that's a good little intro. James.
Hi everyone, I'm James John Louis. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for Zoom EV, and in a nutshell, we provide everything that you need to have a great experience with an electric vehicle, whether it's putting your car for car sharing, an EV driver benefits bundle that gives everything you need to have that experience, and insurance and leasing.
And Alex, over to you.
Hi there, yeah, I'm the Commercial Director at ZapMap. ZapMap, for those that don't know, is the #1 UK mapping service for EV charge points, helping users with our app to search, plan, and pay for charge points. I've been here as Commercial Director since the beginning of the year, but I've been around in the EV world for over 10 years now.
Great. Okay, thanks for the intro. Looking forward to the conversation today. Just going to do a little bit of housekeeping to start off with. So the aim of this webinar is to, as I said, to look at dispelling some of the myths around electric vehicles. Also talk about the benefits of EV ownership for drivers, community, planet as well. We'll be hearing from Co-Charger, who are currently raising finance through Ethics by issuing equity. They've got a live offer on the platform at the moment. It's important to say that this isn't a financial promotion. We can't answer questions about individual circumstances. If you do have a question that you want to go to the panel about EVs and what you want to know about those, then please post your question in the chat function. We'll try and work them into the conversation as we go along, or pick them up at the end. So we're going to be recording today. We're going to upload a recording of the webinar to our YouTube channel and the website, so you can watch it again, you can share it with anyone. We'll also send out a follow-up email too that will have some links to the things that we've covered. We should run for about 45 minutes today, so finishing up about 1:15. Okay, let's get started. There's no doubt that there's a fundamental shift underway from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles. I mean that's being driven by our pressing need to reduce carbon emissions in the transport sector. Government seems to have finally got on board with that, has put in place targets. So we've got a target of 2030 for only then EV vehicles to be sold in the UK. And I was just looking at some stats earlier from ZapMap, and you can see that you can really see this change taking place. There's a 66% growth in ownership of electric vehicles between 2019 and 2020. There's been a 220% growth in public chargers between 2016 and 2020. And what I was amazed about, in the last 30 days alone, there's been 120 new public chargers installed. But I think there is still resistance among drivers to EVs, and a lot of that resistance is being driven by some of the myths around EV ownership. I'm pleased to say that I've now been joined by Phil Shadbolt, who is the CEO of Easy Charge. Phil, do you want to just give one little sentence on Easy Charge before we get going?
Yeah, sure, thanks. Sorry, I had technical difficulties getting in this morning. Yeah, so Easy Charge is a new company set up to deploy 140 the very latest 22 kilowatt chargers all throughout Oxfordshire.
Great. Okay, thanks, Phil. And so Easy Charge will be actually bringing a bond onto the Ethics platform in the near future as well to help finance that rollout. So I'm going to start with the sort of the oldest chestnut of all, which I think is about range anxiety. And I think there's something that's gone alongside that is it's not just range anxiety, but also will the charger be working when I get there? I think, Alex, if I could pass that one across to you, because I think this is something that ZapMap is looking to kind of address.
Yeah, I mean, I think that range anxiety is largely something that we hear from people that have never driven an EV. Rather than people who've actually got an EV and experienced it for themselves. I mean, you know, in the UK at the moment, there are over 25,000 publicly accessible charge points. I believe in terms of home chargers, which you need to add to that, there's over 400,000. And at the same time, we've got 600,000 cars on the road. So, you know, the issue is actually not about the number of chargers. I mean, if you speak to the charge point operators, actually the issue is around, you know, the utilization is too low. You know, the previous EV I had was a Hyundai Kona, which, you know, I'd charge, once every week or two. It would charge overnight. So I'm using that charge point, you know, around 5%. Also in the rapid charge network, you know, networks are maybe getting 3 charges a day on a charge point, half an hour or so. Again, that's less than 10%. So the number of chargers, the availability of chargers is not an issue. What is an issue can be an issue for EV drivers is making sure that when they get to a charge point, it's working and available. And that's something that I know all the networks are working on. We at ZapMap are helping EV drivers by, you know, enabling them to filter to the charge points where there are, you know, more than one charge point on site. For example, you can see live status updates to avoid people driving to a charge point, which is obviously not working. So, I mean, that's the direction of travel. And certainly, as I say, that the myth of range anxiety is largely, you know, for the informed, educated is largely been put to one side. What we need to work on in this industry is making sure that the charge points that are there are accessible, available, and working for people as and when they need them.
Thanks, Alex. And I think it's fair to say that, you know, it's a whole kind of ecosphere of charging, actually. So there's base charging, there's charging while you're en route, and there's charging at your destination. So maybe, Joel, if I could turn to you and see how CoCharger fits into that kind of that ecosphere.
Yeah, I think it's important to get past a common misconception, which I suppose is entirely understandable, which is equating charging an electric vehicle with fueling an ICE vehicle, a fossil fuel vehicle. That's a non sequitur. They don't really add up to the same thing. It's really important to look at the way you run an EV is far more like a mobile phone. And someone recently said to me, well, there's a good reason why you don't get mobile phone charging stations on the M6. You don't need them. And whatever percentage, depending on, it's about 90% of charging is base charging, which is the type of charging you sort before you buy the car. For a lot of people, that's a home charger. If you can have a home charger, workplace charging is in there. Mobile charging, if you're lucky enough to live in a certain bit of London, they'll come and do it for you out of a van and while you sleep. Curbside, very important, which I know is what Phil can talk about as well. Our bit is community charging, which is where you've got a platform that enables somebody who does have a charger to make that available to some of their neighbours on a regular basis, so that those neighbours have got a dependable, convenient and affordable way to charge their car. And that's what enables them to switch to an EV. So that's what CoCharger does. Basically, I've got a charger on my driveway. I register a host account. And there are people in the area who have a terraced house, as I've seen in the comments a few people have got, or a flat or a rented property, all sorts of reasons. And they can register a Chargee account, contact me and say, right, I'll have every Tuesday night, please. And they'll just pay for the time that charger is running. So that's what community charging is, and it's part of the base charging group, if you like.
Great, thanks. And that answers Simon Mitchell's question, I think, who did pose that question about how he can charge, even though he hasn't got a driveway. And then,
free up, go get it.
Yeah. And Phil, if I go over to you, and if you could talk about where Easy Charge fits into that.
Yeah. Thanks, Josh. So picking up on a few of the points in the questions in the chat. So one of the key things that we looked into when we were developing our business model was this fact that about 40% of people that drive vehicles don't have a driveway, don't have the ability to charge their car at home. So what we did is identify those car parks, the local authority car parks, which are close to residents that don't have driveways, don't have the ability to charge at home. And in those car parks, we're now putting EV charging hubs. So we're putting maybe up to 12, sometimes 18 EV charging points to enable people that live close to the car park within a five minutes walk. They can use these car parks to charge overnight or even during the day. So that helps people that don't have the ability to charge at home. The other point that I like to pick up on that someone mentioned about often going to chargers and either they're not working or they're already iced. And these again are two critical points that we're trying to address with Oxfordshire County Council and the Park and Charge project. So the first point about the reliability is our charger has actually 2 microprocessors in it. So these micros talk to one another and they're all the time monitoring the system to make sure that the chargers are available. The second that there's a problem with these chargers, we get a notification here at Easy Charge and we're onto it straight away and we'll identify what the issue is. We can even reboot the charger here within 2 or 3 seconds and make sure that it's up and live. And our record at the moment is, it was last month, I think it was 97% uptime. This month it's 99% uptime. So we're really focusing on a very, very high uptime. Right. The other point, just very briefly on vehicles parking in bays that are reserved for charging, Oxfordshire County Council now have actually put a notice, a penalty notice, such that if vehicles are plugged in these EV charging bays and they're not plugged in and they're not charging, then they may get a fine. So we're very hopeful that this will discourage people from icing our charge points.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Phil. And I think part of this as well, in terms of it's dispelling some of the myths, which is the negatives, but actually I think there are a lot of positives around being an EV owner and actually the driver experience of being an EV, of having an EV. And James, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, the sort of positives, I think.
Yeah, I think just before I go on to that, one of the things, that original question was about range anxiety. I mean, I go back to 2013 when I was driving one of the very first Nissan Leafs, and the range of that vehicle was, you were lucky to get 80 miles out of that range. So that range anxiety, it wasn't a myth, it was reality, and it was a real issue back then. But if you take today's Nissan Leaf, basically the same shape, I know it's been updated, the envelope for the battery pack is virtually the same, but the range is at least 3 times what it was back then. So battery technology and improvement in range has just considerably increased in a very short space of time. But in terms of busting the myth, my answer to it all is you need to get in one to try one. If you've been unsure, and at Zoom EV we enable that by putting electric vehicles on our platform for sharing, to give people that opportunity to at least have the experience and try it, and if you like, particularly with some of the newer cars, prove that it fits with their day-to-day life. We work with a lot of auto dealer groups up and down the UK, and they're now putting their demonstrator cars on our platform so that you don't have to go in and, dare I say it, have a salesman breathing down your neck, but you can take a car off the platform, take it home, put it on your drive as you would normally drive. And we're now seeing people that do that, take a car off the sharing platform, and actually, because they realise, in their day-to-day driving, the range isn't an issue. If they do need to drive to Scotland, the growing network, as ZapMap will show, of charging hubs, on-the-go charging stations means you can. I mean, yes, we need to address the issues of icing and, the number of available charge points, but you can see that on apps where they're available.
Could you just explain the term icing? Because we're having a few questions coming in, people asking what does icing mean? So could you just tell us what you mean by that?
Icing, sorry, we talk about terminology. Having been in this space for 10 years like Alex, icing is internal combustion engine, i.e. ICE. So if somebody's been iced, it means that a diesel or petrol car is blocking or parked in a parking space where there's a charge point, which means somebody who needs to charge, that drives an electric car that needs to be plugged in, can't. And we use the expression iced or icing because it's internal combustion engine is the ICE.
Okay, thanks for that. There's a few questions coming in here, and I think this is really, this is core to certainly the people who are registered on ethics and what we're about, is questions around sustainability and impact and maybe comparative impact. So, an electric vehicle uses less energy in its use, but there's quite a bit of energy embodied in its manufacture. Now, in terms of that kind of ratio between the two of those, is it the case that we have to wait until there's much more renewables coming into the grid before that balances out? And I think there's a similar question around, if I have a diesel or a petrol engine vehicle now, is it actually sustainable to get rid of that and get an EV, or should I just wait until this stops functioning, this current vehicle, and then transfer to an EV? Alex, if I could just put that through to you, those 2 points to you first.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there've been a number of studies. The one off the top of my head was one done by Imperial College a couple of years ago around the total life cycle emissions of an electric vehicle compared to a petrol vehicle. And the conclusion of that was roughly around 50%. So an electric vehicle has roughly 50% the emissions of a equivalent petrol or diesel. And remember, this is 2 years ago. The great thing about electric vehicles is that you're clearly not reliant on fossil fuels. You're reliant on electricity, and we know the grid is decarbonizing in this country, in pretty much all countries, extremely quickly. So as we get increasing penetration of renewables onto the grid, that 50% will soon drop down. I think in the study they even talked about a 10% difference compared to petrol and diesel. So there are discrepancies. If you're going to buy a big SUV, you're going to need a big battery. There's more to carry around. But on average, clearly, electric vehicles have a much lower impact than petrol and diesel. In terms of that question, I thought it was a very good question by someone in the chat about is it worth selling your petrol vehicle now to someone who the person in question drives it just 3,000 miles. If he sells it to someone who then drives it 30,000 miles for him to get an electric vehicle, my brain's not big enough to compute those numbers. So I'll kind of leave you to kind of work out what you think is best to do. But broadly, yeah, the science, if we're to follow the science, is pretty empirical that EVs over their lifetime will have a less impact on the environment. There was another short question I want to pick up on about sourcing. I think ethical sourcing of particularly what would be precious metals for batteries, and the person in question mentioned DRC. So for those that aren't aware, DR Congo was a country in southern Western Africa, which is rich in various kind of minerals, particularly cobalt, which is used in batteries. My understanding of that from a talk I went to, who's an expert in batteries and supply chain, which certainly I'm not, is that cobalt is largely being designed out of batteries, or certainly the amount of cobalt is being reduced. The sources of cobalt are being increased around the country, and because there's focus on it, also the ethical sourcing of cobalt is increasing even in places like DRC. So have we solved that problem? Absolutely not. But again, I think there's always a tendency for people to look at EVs in isolation rather than comparing to the alternative reality. And if you look at the petrol and diesel cars, you also need to think about where the petrol comes from, for example, and that's also sourced from places where they have let's say not quite the ethical standards that we do in the West.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Alex. And Joel, I know in the past we've chatted a little bit about lithium sourcing as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of conflation there. I think people hear horror stories about cobalt, as described by Alex there, and then conflate that with lithium. By the way, people seem to forget that far more cobalt is going into your laptop battery that you're staring at right now, your phone battery, or into refining petrol. Forget about that, don't they? That's where most of the cobalt goes. Lithium is one of the commonest things on the planet. It's more common than tin. It's in every igneous rock on the planet. We've got loads of it in Cornwall. You can get it out of seawater. There are bad ways of mining it and good ways of mining it. The problem, as with anything, is in mining rather than in the material itself. But again, you can point to lithium mining and say, "Well, look, there's a big plant there." But then, can we look at oil for a moment? I mean, 2 weeks ago, there was a massive oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Again, didn't even make the news. That had been lithium. Oh, can't have lithium. It's really dangerous. I think we've got to balance all these things and realize, you know what? There's no such thing as renewable fossil fuel. But you can power an entire battery factory renewably, and Tesla do, and Volkswagen do, and everybody else will. So the direction of travel is important. So yes, there's more work to be done on cutting down the environmental impact of EVs. It is already much lower than for fossil fuel cars, and it can be taken way lower yet. And I think that's the important thing, is it may be 50% at the moment. It's going to drop down to a fraction of that. So yeah, much greener and able to become far more green yet.
Okay, thanks, Joel. Alex, we've got a bit of a specific question that's coming around the pins on ZapMap, and just asking, is it someone saying that they've been in a car park and even with the pin have found difficulty locating the charger? I just wanted to, if you could.
Yeah, very specific question, but a very good one.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, we have a team of data analysts. So, what happens when a charge point comes online, which, largely with our charge point operator partners, that's an automatic process. It still goes through that manual filter. And we do a number of checks to, just make sure that the data that we get through is accurate. And part of that is making sure that the latitude and longitude is exactly right. And they'll check that off with Google Maps. It's a pretty good process. Is it 100% foolproof in terms of, is the charge point in that corner of the car park or that corner of the car park? Not always, but in a large part it is. In cases where it's not, the great thing about the ZapMap community is that they largely let us know. So in the Zap chat, the EV cafe section of the app. So I just encourage any user who does come across those kind of situations is please put that in the chat, we'll pick up on it. Data is extremely important to us, and we do everything we can to make sure that the data is as accurate and up to date as possible. But any feedback is always very welcome.
Right. Thanks,
Can I just add to that? Just something that I've come across and have found really useful that maybe more charge point operators could incorporate, and even Co-Charger at Joel. It's an organization, I'm sure we've all heard of What 3 Words, and What 3 Words basically has created a grid over the globe, and I'm pretty sure it's a 3 meter square. And I used it recently to direct somebody to the gate of where I live. And it literally, if I'm standing in a 3 meter square, it just brought me exactly to that point. I mean, they use examples of a delivery driver saying, I've got to deliver to the back door of the O2 Arena. Well, there's 20 back doors of the O2 Arena. So putting What 3 Words. But if you apply it to charge point locations, it literally takes you to the exact spot. Now, I know I've read reports about whether you spell it correctly and, all of those sort of things that you can, open to errors. But in answering that point about locations, that's something I thought would be really interesting for charge point operators and installers.
That's a really good point, actually, James, because recently with our latest release of our app, we support What 3 Words in the ZapMap app. So it's our first subscription level, so ZapMap Plus. But it's feedback we got from our community of drivers that's something they wanted to see. So
I mean, I
Voila.
shared one of the, and there was a question that just came up a bit earlier, as you say, and I've been in that situation, driving around a car park, and I just don't know exactly where that charge point location is.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, we've heard that feedback. We listened to it, and yeah, hopefully this will be an improvement.
Right. So I think just sort of cycling back towards some of the myths, and this is supported by a couple of questions that come in here as well. There's a question around affordability. So I mean, the list price of EVs currently is that much higher than internal combustion engine vehicles. So, but I just wanted to know if maybe, James, you wanted to speak to that point a little bit about what does the overall cost look like? And there's a follow-up question there, which is concern about people about as the battery, over time and over use declines in the charge it can hold, what impact that has on the value of their vehicle.
Yeah, I think the first place to start with, the point to make when it comes to the cost is to always look at the total cost of ownership, not necessarily the cost of the vehicle. And we do see that, the cost of the actual list price of electric vehicles is more, but the actual total cost of the ownership, whether it's over a 3 or a 4-year period, is less. And another thing to figure into that is that it, as part of that total cost of ownership, of course, is the running and servicing and maintenance of that vehicle. And I'm not sure the exact figure, but in an ICE vehicle, and we all know now what an ICE vehicle is, petrol and diesel vehicles, there are thousands of moving parts in a petrol and diesel vehicle, just in the engine alone, whereas in an electric vehicle, I believe it's less than 20 actual moving parts. So servicing costs are, just hugely different. And then, of course, the cost of the energy. Yes, it depends where you charge. And I know an issue is whether you have home charging or, sorry, there's a motorbike going past, home charging or, yeah, sorry. I'm going to have to introduce him to electric motorcycles. I really am. Whether it's home charging, where most charging is done, and I know we've talked about if you don't have a home charger, use the co-charger network. But the actual cost, I use an average of, if you fill up a petrol diesel car and do 100 miles at today's pump prices, it's going to cost you around £18-ish. I mean, depending where you fill up. But on my home energy tariff, it's currently costing me circa £4. So again, just look at that difference. I know public charging tariffs vary depending on the operator, but I don't mind paying for energy if I'm going on a 300-mile trip and I need, I have to charge to get back. That's convenience, and it's still comparable to what I would normally pay. But somebody's made a point in the questions that leasing costs are very, very cheap. And I think we're finding the comparison of petrol and diesel cars with the vehicles that we lease at Zoom EV Leasing mean that the monthly costs, which is, again, what most people look at, it's affordability, it's what is the cost to run that vehicle. And we are finding that when you finance vehicles that way, actually the total ownership cost, a total cost of ownership is something you must look at, and it is the best way to do it.
Okay,
that's what we're finding, and it's when people look at those other things that they perhaps don't think of, they just get blinded by the headline, if you like, the sticker price of the car. There are so many other things that you must take into account.
Okay, thanks. We seem to have lost Phil, which is a shame, because I was just going to ask him a question. Okay, it's just coming back in. Yeah, Phil, I wanted to ask you, because there's some questions coming in here about compatibility of connectors, and presumably that's a challenge for you providing public charging infrastructure. So, I mean, what's your thoughts on is it a very fragmented space? Is there movement towards it being less fragmented?
Sorry, was that aimed at me? My internet's just gone very, very
Okay. Did you hear the question, Phil? Or? No, okay. I don't know if does anybody else want to pick up that question, Joel? I mean, maybe that's a thing
I'm
for
going to
you.
say on price and cost, because it's one of my favourite soapboxes. Sorry, everybody. I think this is a problem because even people who are supposed to be experts annoy me by conflating price and cost. They're two different things. Price is a figure and a cost is an amount over time. And it is fair to say, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but generally the price of EVs is higher than the price of the equivalent ICE car, unless you're buying a Porsche or a high-end Mercedes. But the cost of an EV is generally lower than for the equivalent ICE car. Because although, say, that car costs an extra 10,000 quid for the electric version, over 15 years, which is the life of the car, is how long that difference takes effect. Whereas, say, over 3 years, you're not paying £10,000 more over 3 years. You're paying perhaps £3,000 more over 3 years. And that's easily counteracted by the difference in running costs. So I'd never had a new car. I'd always had quite old cars, but I was spending, like most people, about 150 a month just on fuel and more on servicing, if I allow for the fact they were old and things went wrong. And you try to forget about that, £800 bill for a new brakes or a fix on the gearbox or whatever, don't you? But that added up. The tax, what's that, 155 now standard? My EV, I've got a brand new Zoe, and all in, including absolutely everything, costs me under 250 a month. And if anybody claims they're running an ICE car for less than that, they're not being honest. So the thing of they cost too much, I think, is misinformation. I think that people look at, like you say, the ticket price, and that is the wrong figure to look at because it's largely irrelevant. You pay depreciation and running costs, and EVs add up to less for most people.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I think the key thing that's shifted here is, talking about leasing, is the residual value of EVs compared to batteries. I think there's a question in the chat about, what about when the battery dies? I mean, there are a couple of things to say here, right? Is firstly, there were concerns, beginning of the EV, let's call it a revolution, is that the battery charge or state of health would suddenly fall off a cliff after however many years. Well, we've been through a long enough time. My parents have had an EV since 2012. That doesn't happen. There's a gradual decrease, as you would expect. So that's not a concern. And in terms of end of life of a petrol diesel versus end of life versus electric car, when a petrol or diesel is at the end of its life, it's done. It's gone. You probably have to pay to get rid of it in terms of scrapping. With an electric vehicle, what you'll have is still a good bunch of lithium inside your battery, which is of value. So that's starting to be taken into account in the residual value cost. And when your EV is done, lithium is sufficiently available, but it's a valuable commodity which you'll be able to effectively cash in for. Okay,
thanks, Alex.
Adding to that point from Alex, just adding to that point from Alex is that you are seeing strong residual values for used EVs currently, and there's a real growing market for people that do think actually the headline price of new EVs is high, and we've discussed that, but there's a really growing demand for used EVs, which is partly pushing up residuals. I mean, we all know actually with chip shortages, there is actually a shortage of delivery. There's a supply issue for new vehicles, so that the demand is very high for used, and that doesn't seem to look like it's going to reduce anytime soon, which is, as we're seeing in the leasing prices, helping that residual value, which is the value of the vehicle at the end of the term, which means the overall monthly cost is better because the end of the 3-year or 4-year term value is higher.
Okay, yeah, thanks, James. So we're talking about transition, and I guess when you're thinking about that transition, there's maybe also a transition from the way in which people use transport and mobility. And here I'm thinking about car sharing, or car clubs and those kind of approaches. I don't know, maybe Phil, is that sort of direction of travel that you see us moving in? You see that as key to the transition?
Yeah, I think anything like that's going to help us to make that transition and make it easier for everyone to use. So yeah, I think from our perspective, we're encouraging people to use our chargers that run car charging clubs, so that they can actually use the hubs for people to replace the cars, put the cars back there, and people know where they are, because we've got a large amount of charging hubs going in. So I think it's part of the solution. I think as we transition over to EVs, which we undoubtedly will now, there's going to be lots of solutions for charging, lots of different vehicle types, and lots of different methods now where we can actually choose to use a car maybe differently to the way we did in the past. You know, we might just go to an EV charging hub, pick up a vehicle to drive to the next town, drop it off at the EV charging hub, and that's the use of the vehicle done. It's quite a nice, efficient way of using these electric vehicles for the future. So it's you know, it's not a defined way yet. I don't think necessarily that we're all going to use vehicles in that way, but I think what we're going to see is lots of different options, which I think is wonderful for the market.
And maybe if I just sort of like, you know, it's sort of slightly conscious of time, maybe if I just open up to each of the panel and sort of get some thoughts on you on the direction of travel, and what you know, how positive do you feel? How negative? You think it's in a good place? James, let's start with you.
I think just, and it's, yeah, absolutely happy to do that. And I think just following on from what's just been said, globally, and I'm not talking about cars here, I'm talking about anything that we get involved in our daily lives. The transition is from ownership to usership. So, you know, owning things is different, and cars comes under that. And we find that at Zoom EV, where people are looking more at using something than owning it. The reality is, even if you own or lease, so you don't, you know, say you've just got a new car, actually you probably lease it and you pay a monthly fee for it. Even that car will sit on a drive and not move well over 90% of the time. I think it's statistics show it's 95% of the time. So the Zoom EV car sharing platform means my car can be on the platform, is on the platform, and is available to the community to use that car. Where CoCharger works really well is that the person that's going to use it is unlikely to have a charger at home. So there's another brilliant use for the CoCharger network of doing that. But we're moving from ownership to usership. And with the transition to EVs, what we're looking at and what we feel and what we hear from the people that use us is that they want that experience, and they see that car sharing is a good way of having that experience. And when they've got it, they realize that actually putting the car on the platform means that other people can have access to it, means they can get some revenue from it, because at the end of the day, by sharing, you get some revenue back. And we, as I say, not just cars, but most things that we get involved in, we're definitely moving to using things rather than when we need them, rather than owning them.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Josh, there's a bit of noise on the chats around compatibility, and I don't think we've kind of fully answered that. So I think it's very justified. So I'd like to spend just, you know, the short time talking about compatibility and charger types and the rest of it. I mean, yeah, so I've been around this business for 10 years, and well before then, the standard for a AC socket was set. So that's the Type 2 socket. That hasn't gone anywhere since, and it's not going anywhere soon. So certainly in terms of home charging, a charger with a Type 2 socket, that gives you all the flexibility. I mean, it is true that, you know, certainly the early Nissan Leafs had a Type 1 on their side, but if you have a socket charger at home, then you just get the right cable and you're done. Either way, it seems as though the industry's moving to, on the rapid side of things, a bit more towards CCS. So you have CCS and CHAdeMO. CCS is an extension of Type 2. So that's kind of quite a logical transition. There is also CHAdeMO, which is the standard from Japan. So again, the Nissan Leafs, it seems as though they might be moving towards CCS, but you know, listen, the chargers are going in the ground today, support CHAdeMO and CCS, the rapid chargers. So grid server, as I'm sure a lot of your listeners are aware that Grid Server are plowing significant cash into building out their Grid Server electric highway network that will support Shadowmo. Yeah, so for me, even though there's transitions towards CCS, compatibility is not an issue. You have a home charger with a Type 2 socket, and on the road you'll be able to charge Shadowmo and CCS for the foreseeable future. Someone was asking, by the way, about what electricity supply they should have at home for a home charger, and it is 32 amps single phase. So there you are. There's a quick piece of information for free. But in terms of compatibility, again, I think it's kind of a, people are looking for excuses not to get into electric vehicles, and yeah, again, that's not one of them for me.
Thanks for that, Alex. Noel, if we just come to you, I'm conscious that we've probably got like three or so minutes left, so just to kind of wrap up with some couple of final comments and come to you after that, Phil.
Sure.
I think you said me, right? No, who did you ask? Sorry.
Joel,
oh, it is me. Okay, right. Yeah, just to back up that, one of my favourite bits of research was the ZapMap piece, because they do some awesome research. I think it was something like, of all the people who've tried both types of car, fully electric and fossil fuel, it's around 99% stick with the electric. I can't think of another product that's had that. That makes 8 out of 10 cats seem a bit lame. And I think this is the point about the myth busting and the misinformation that's out there. And believe me, there is some very carefully planned and funded misinformation to make you think these things. 99%. That's the real truth. So as James was saying earlier, just try it, because there's a reason why only 1% go, now I'm going back to my petrol car. You know, the cost actually is probably cheaper for you. The range thing, you know what? If you realized how seldom it mattered, you wouldn't care. And if you saw how rapidly things are improving with people like ZapMap doing real-time information on public transport, on public chargers, even when you do need a public charger, it's going to be okay. So I'd say, yeah, it's a great space to be in. Obviously, we're very grateful to Ethics for their efforts on our raise, which is going very well. But I think what we're seeing is the tipping point now, when we're getting past the myths and we're getting into the realities. And you know what? People just prefer the EVs. So yes, there's some challenges, but they're being dealt with very quickly. And 99% stick with it.
That's a good figure, Joel. Phil, if we just go to you to get your final thoughts as well, please.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. So my thoughts is, look, we have to stop burning stuff. You know, that is indisputable. We are, most local authorities have already declared a climate emergency. We can see around us, just look on the news every day, the climate is #1 topic. We have to stop burning stuff. What's the best contribution we can make as individuals to stop burning stuff is to drive electric vehicles and drive a sustainable future for all of our children and our children's children. It's as simple as that. This is the #1 thing that we must do, that we can do, which actually drives us to a better solution and a better route forwards for us all.
Thanks, Phil. Very fitting ending there, that we're driving to the solution for us all. Okay. So I'd just like to say thank you to the panel. So Alex, James, Joel, Phil, that was great. Really, really vibrant conversation. Just remind everyone that the webinar's been recorded, it'll be uploaded. There'll be a follow-up email with useful links. I'd like to thank all the audience for joining us today and for the loads of questions that have come through. What we're going to try and do is probably get some of these questions answered that we didn't manage to cover in the follow-up as well. So just finish up and say, you know, please do come and have a look at the Ethics website. Co-Charger on there. They're only on there for a few more days, so come and take a look, and Easy Charge will be coming soon. So just thank you to everyone and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye now.
Thank you so much. Bye now.